Welcome, everyone. Welcome. You know, we've been doing this 8 times this entire year. I figured by time 8 you get it, but well, again, welcome. It was noted American philosopher and author John Dewey who said, education is not preparation for life. Education is life. Never stop learning. Seeking information and knowledge makes you and our communities all the much stronger. And I don't have to tell this audience that. You came here today with the express intention of learning from others from a different vantage point and continuing your lifelong learning. So, congratulations and welcome. On behalf of Boston College and the Carroll School of Management, welcome to the Boston College Chief Executives Club. Thank you, Pratt. Pratt's been paying attention, so well done. If I'm a little groggy or slow, I blame my friend Wick Grossbeck and his team last night. Kept me up about 3 hours past my bedtime. I did go to bed with a smile on my face, with a victory, although it took a while to fall asleep. But thank you for entertaining, Wick. It was well done. Obviously, this past week, there has been a commitment to education and lifelong learning as a message has been conveyed to thousands of students across the region who have participated in commencement ceremonies over the past week or so. On Monday, Boston College graduated over 2,000 students, and they were challenged by the speakers to continue that pursuit of knowledge. They were reminded that the mission of Boston College, men and women for others, demands that you continue that seeking information and education. It does not end when you cross across that stage and shake someone's hand. It may be the last time they receive a piece of paper acknowledging, but it's just the first step in that journey to continuing to learn and to grow. There ends my short TED Talk. As I mentioned, we are now concluding our 31st season. The Boston College Chief Executives Club is looking forward to our 32nd season as the 2024-25 season will start in September when we welcome the CEO of Lockheed Martin, Jim Taiclet, to our stage. We will then follow up that event with the CEOs of McDonald's, Amgen, and Visa. Thank you, Al. Now, on to our host for the day, our long friend and former keynote speaker himself, Mr. Al Kelly. Al served as chairman and the CEO of Visa for 10 years. And during that decade, Visa had tremendous success. Revenue grew by 2.5 times, and their market cap grew by a multiple of 4. He retired in February of 2024 and has gone on to pursue a bunch of other interests, including philanthropic work and some other investments. We are thrilled that he is on the board of trustees at Boston College. He received his undergraduate degree and his MBA from Iona University. So thank you and welcome, Al. And finally, obviously, our keynote speaker today is David Solomon, chairman and CEO of the Goldman Sachs Group. David ascended to the CEO position in 2018 following another former keynote speaker for us, Lloyd Blankfein, who spoke for us several years ago. David joined Goldman Sachs in 1999 and moved up through the ranks over that time, including roles as president and COO. He has had a varied career, having spent time at other management firms, but he has been with Goldman since 1999. He's on the board of the Robin Hood Foundation, and is chair of the board of his alma mater at Hamilton College in upstate New York. Please welcome to the stage David and Al. Thank you. Thank you.
Warren, thank you on behalf of both of us. I'm certainly thrilled to be here with my friend David Solomon. He is a terrific leader, has incredible instincts, and you'll see a great level of pragmatism in him, which I think is important for a CEO. Just as Warren said, is in his 25th year. Congratulations at Goldman, which is fantastic. One of the impacts I think that you can see in what David did, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week, Friday, I believe, looking at the climb of the Dow from its 30,000 point level, which it hit in November of 20, to the 40,000 point level. And Goldman Sachs was the highest contributor, contributing 1,500 of those 10,000 points during that period of time, slightly ahead of that little company, Microsoft. So that is certainly a great testament to David's leadership. So David, welcome, and we're thrilled to have you with us. You grew up in Scarsdale, went to Edgemont High School, attended Hamilton College, where, as I said to you, you're doing God's work as their chair now. And then your first job was at Irving Trust. What, in all of that experience, helped shape who you are today?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with everybody, and I'll thank you and thank you to the Boston College program for having me. I sit often and kind of look in the mirror and say, how did I become 62 years old and the CEO of Goldman Sachs for the last 6 years? I can't connect the dots. And I happened to do a talk the other day where somebody asked a similar question. I had no idea I'd pursue finance. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I think one of the reasons I'm not a lawyer is I didn't do great on my law boards. I was out the night before at Hamilton College, and that was probably not a wise decision. It all worked out okay, but I think there's something, when I look back and think about who I am and some of the incredible opportunities I've been afforded, and luck, I think, plays a lot in everybody's journey. Luck plays a big role, but my parents, there was something about my parents and the way my parents were that they really, instilled, in me, kind of a work ethic and a desire to stretch and reach and look ahead, and really, not worry about the current, but just kind of take a long-term view, but to work hard and, let the world kind of be your oyster. And I think when I look back at my career and kind of how it all came together, a lot of it was luck. There certainly was some hard work along the way, but also a good amount of patience and just kind of enjoying each stage of it and not really having an expectation as to where the next stage would go.
That's great. Goldman Sachs is an incredible brand, and everybody recognizes the name, but I think it would be great for the audience if you could tell us a little bit about what the key businesses are in the company and how it's evolved under your leadership.
Sure. So, first of all, one of the things that the leadership team thinks about every day is we really view ourselves as stewards of this organization that's been around since 1869, 155 years. Started as a small partnership that sold commercial paper in the bowels of Wall Street in the 1860s, and it grew, through the last century, into a prominent investment bank and a prominent trading firm, and ultimately into the asset and wealth management business. The firm has always been an institutional firm, and I think one of the unique things about the firm that there are a whole variety of reasons that things played out this way. Wall Street was a collection of small partnerships for a long, long time, and one by one they all started going public in the late 1970s. That process started, but by the time the 1990s came around, there really was only one significantly sized, private partnership left. It was Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs really stayed a private partnership until the last possible minute that it could be a private partnership before it just had to take, the growth was accelerating too quickly and it had to take permanent capital. So the firm went public in 1999, and the period from 1999 to the financial crisis, the firm grew like a weed. Financial firms were globalizing. Finance was going from a localized business to a global business. And so one of the advantages of that is the firm really ran like a private partnership, even though it was a public company. It gave no one any information. It answered no questions. The CEO didn't go on an earnings call. There was never an investor day. It was a private company that just happened to have a publicly traded stock.
All sounds very attractive.
It was very, very attractive. I think Hank Paulson had a much easier job than the job is today. Financial crisis shook that all up. The firm became a bank as opposed to, it became a regulated banking institution. And, it really has wrestled with this transition from being a private company to a public company for the last 25 years. The 25th anniversary of the IPO was a few weekends ago. And the firm's wrestled, but it's clearly, I think one of the big things that's evolved now, and this leadership team's been very focused on, is we are a public company, we're a Fortune 50 company. We have to perform like one, which means we have to grow, and our stock price performance on a relative basis has to work. And that's what we've really been focused on over the last 5 or 6 years. And today, what the firm is two principal businesses. Our core business that everybody knows us for as an investment banker and trader. I think in that business, that combined business of investment banking and what we call markets, I think we are the leading firm in that business. And we're at scale. We have a right, not only do we have a right to win, we do win in that business, and we work very hard to protect our leadership position in that business. And that business serves governments, big corporations, and institutions. We then, over the last few years, have taken a bunch of different asset management and wealth management businesses and put them together, and we now have a scaled asset and wealth management platform where we supervise a little less than $3 trillion of assets. It's growing nicely, high single digits. We think we can continue to grow it in a meaningful way. We think we have a very interesting offering in that business, and that is kind of the growth engine for the firm. We have experimented in some retail businesses that's gotten a lot of attention publicly for something that was relatively small in the overall scale of Goldman Sachs, but for a variety of reasons, we've scaled that back, and we're going to focus on those two businesses and really try to grow the market cap. And one of the things that we're very proud of is that over the last 6 years, we've taken the market cap from $65 billion to nearly $150 billion today. And, I think we've got more that we can do to grow and scale the firm, and so we're excited about it. But very, very focused on serving our clients and making sure, that at the core, the things we do well, we continue to do very well for our clients, because that's what will get us to this next level.
As a multi-time client of yours, I would say that one of the things that differentiates you is the unbelievable quality of your people, throughout the firm. But what would you say is the secret sauce that differentiates Goldman from its competitors?
Well, I appreciate the comment about our people. I mean, if you just said to me, what differentiates the firm, the first thing out of my mouth would be our people. Many who have come before the current leadership team of the firm worked hard to create a culture and an environment that would attract and retain, very, very high quality, highly motivated people that wanted to work very, very hard in a very, very competitive environment, but also managed to develop a culture of excellence that, has really perpetuated with all sorts of pressures that exist in the world that haven't always existed the same way. And, I think it starts with the differentiation of the firm, starts with the people. At the end of the day, it's still people business. It's about the interactions individuals have. Of course, we're an enormous technology platform. We have 45,000 people, 11,000 of them are engineers. But at the end of the day, when it comes to clients trusting the firm, it starts with one-on-one relationships and really, really extraordinary people. And so we work hard to really make sure that we retain that. That requires investment in the culture, investment in people, investment in recruiting and retention, et cetera. And I think it is, at the end of the day, the secret sauce. Then there are 150 other things that you've got to do really, really well. But it starts there. And one of the things that we worry about as the world changes and you have different dynamics with different generations, if we don't perpetuate that, if we allow that in some way to move toward a different level of excellence or a different level of complacency, that will hurt our business given the nature of our business. And by nature, that is a harder business to run than a lot of other businesses, but that's core to who we are.
And you and I have talked about that and lamented some of the numbers of people want to work from home for many days. Where are you guys right now on that?
We're operating exactly the way we operated before the pandemic, and it's interesting. The narrative around this, it's been, I watch narratives about the firm, and the firm gets a lot of attention. It's a very, very visible entity. For our firm, any organization can choose to run its organization the way they want to run it. Our firm is 50% of the people in our firm are in their 20s. They come to the firm for the explicit purpose of learning from other people. It doesn't happen the same way when they're not coming together. And so it was just very apparent in the spring of 2020 and during the summer of 2020 that the way the world had evolved because of the pandemic was hurting our firm, our culture, our business. And as the principal steward in charge who had to wear the decision making, it just became very clear to me very quickly that for our firm, we had to figure out how to get our firm back to normal as soon as it was appropriate. And we did that. And the narrative became that we had very strong, rigid views about any kind of flexibility or any kind of work from home. The firm actually has always been a pretty flexible place. Before the pandemic, on any given day, 75 to 80% of the people would be in the office. The others would be traveling, working from home, dealing with whatever they need to deal with. There's also the difference between how a 39-year-old managing director or young partner of the firm works on a day-to-day basis versus how a 24-year-old works on a day-to-day basis. And we just kept saying, we're coming back together, we're coming back together. We never set a rule ever about how many days this, how many days that. And it just became very clear that if you're going to work at Goldman Sachs, you're going to win, you're going to succeed at Goldman Sachs, we were going back to that model. Now, obviously, technology creates flexibility. It's a very mobile firm. People travel constantly, but we've managed to find the balance. But that human connectivity is very, very important in our business.
Talk a little bit about your leadership. How do you lead? What's important to you? How do you keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on across a large enterprise like Goldman Sachs?
Well, one of the things that, and I know you and I have talked about this, and I know you'd share this. These jobs are enormously complex, and at times, enormously isolating. Lonely, I think is fair. But at the same point, it's different for different businesses. But I think you've got some foundational principles that are very important. First of all, as a CEO, you have to have a strategic view. You have to spend time, making sure you've formulated that, and then you've got to articulate it, transmit it, express it, and figure out how to get the organization to get behind it. But if you don't have kind of a compass pointing to true north as to what your strategic vision is for the firm, the organization, where it's going, it's very, very hard to move the organization in a competitive world in that direction. So first and foremost, you have to form that strategic view and then figure out how you're going to execute upon it. I think one of the unique challenges that I have in this job is most CEOs that run big organizations have a leadership group of 10 to 12 people under them. That would be a large number of direct reports, but let's call it 10 to 20 people who really are operating the organization. And most CEOs spend 80% of their time when they're dealing with people internally, dealing with those 10 to 20 people. This organization still runs, even though it's a public company, as a pseudo-partnership, where there are over 400 partners, and every single one of those partners feels they have the same latitude in our organization to be operating and expressing a view as anyone else. And as the CEO or the managing partner, you have to be open to that, engage that, be receptive to that, and that's not scalable. And it takes a different method of investment. And so one of the challenges, and I've learned a lot and progressed a lot over the last 5 or 6 years, is figuring out how to manage in a true public company that we've morphed to, this partnership culture. And I think we're doing it well, but it's required some significant investment of time and effort. And I always think in a broader sense about leadership. Leadership is very easy when everyone's running in the right direction. And there are lots of things that go on in organizations where people just run in the direction they're supposed to run. But the hardest thing we have to do as leaders is when we have a strategic view that the organization needs to go in a particular direction, and it's not the direction that most of the people are inclined to go. And so somehow you've got to figure out how to get people to be more inclined to go in that direction. And I think one of the big learnings I've had over the last 5 or 6 years is how to better communicate that stuff, how to better empower, how to better embrace and find ways to get others, to help you, move the organization along. But it's not easy. I also think leaders today, we're all more visible. There are a whole variety of reasons for that. Some of it's changes in the media. Social media has a big impact on all that. But I think
Glassdoor ratings.
Yeah, Glassdoor ratings, LinkedIn. I look, I have 1.4 million followers on LinkedIn. I'm like, who are these people? I mean,
and you have no idea how to communicate with them.
Yeah. But I do think there has to be an authenticity to who you are as a person that somehow comes out in the context of what you're doing. CEOs used to be very, very isolated. And today in an organization, especially a human capital organization, a professional services organization, I think you've got to be super authentic in order to connect with and work with people, especially young people.
Yeah, I think the word authenticity is critical for a good leader, for sure. You're also, when you talk about time management, you're also extremely client-focused. So at least that's my take. Would you agree with that? And how do you think about the time that you spend with clients versus time you spend internally or with investors?
There are a handful of big buckets, as we all know, and you and I were sitting here talking about one, which is the board.
Yeah.
And let's just say for a moment that the board becomes the fourth bucket, and you basically devote, the 110 or 120% of the time to the board. But if you're looking at the 100% of the time, I think in our firm, for my job, about 3 big buckets: the strategy and the execution of the strategy, spending time with clients, spending time with our people. And it would be fair to say that the starting point, each year is a third, a third, a third. And then we get very purposeful in terms of how we allocate time and what we choose to do, and we manage around it. But I last year had 450 bilateral meetings, face-to-face bilateral meetings with clients of the firm. They could be CEOs, they could be CEOs, CFOs, they could be leaders of institutional firms, they could be people in our private wealth system, anybody that would qualify as a client, CIO of a pension fund. Then lots and lots of group meetings, sitting at a table with a group of clients, et cetera. Tremendous amount of travel. I probably travel about 70% of the time. One of the interesting challenges is, while the firm's New York-centric, if you go back to when I joined the firm in 1999, the firm had about 13,500 employees. 93% of them were in 4 places: New York, London, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. In the United States, we had 10,000 of those 13,500 employees. 9,300 were in New York. Today, the firm has 45,000 employees. 9,500 are in New York. We have 25,000 employees in the United States. All the rest are spread around the United States. We've created 15,000 jobs in the United States in the last 25 years. They're all outside of New York. And so one of the things that's interesting is the people in New York, when I'm not in New York, are like, you're not in New York enough. But the 4,000 people in Dallas, Texas are, how come you're only here twice a year?
Right.
The 3,500 people in Salt Lake City are, how come you're only here, once a year or twice a year? The 1,300 people in Warsaw, 1,200 people in Singapore, 2,000 people in Hong Kong. It's a very, very diverse footprint. Second largest office in the world is in Bangalore, India, where we have about 8,000 people. So it's got to be mobile for the people. It's got to be mobile for clients, very global client set. And so that's just the nature of this job. It's a little bit different that way.
I want to go back to this point about the visibility of CEOs. And increasingly in the last number of years, CEOs have been dragged into a bunch of social and political issues, either by the media asking you a question or, frankly, employees asking you a question in a town hall. And I'm curious as to what your views are about the role CEOs should play relative to social and political issues.
Well, I mean, this has gotten increasingly more complicated, and I'd say my compass on this, first of all, there are things that I think the firm and our leadership team and myself have deep expertise in, and we should comment on those things. So somebody wants to talk about the macroeconomy or interest rates, we have a point of view, we have deep expertise, we should comment. When you get into political positions, we don't have deep expertise, and we try not to comment. We have a lens of direct impact to our people, but generally speaking, when it's political debate, and by the way, if you look at Goldman Sachs people, it's a truly global workforce. You look at Goldman Sachs people, you could pick any issue, and there'd be lots of Goldman Sachs people on both sides of any issue. You could pick any political election, there'd be lots of Goldman Sachs on both sides of any issue. And so, our job is to support our people, but it's not to put ourselves in the middle of political debate. I have lots of personal opinions. I'll find ways, to do things that I think I should do for my platform to support things that I think are important personally, but that's not my responsibility as the CEO of Goldman Sachs.
I totally agree. I think that you want everybody to view Goldman Sachs as a potential place of business. And the minute you start taking points of view on social and political issues, you're turning off current customers or clients or potential clients. So I think it's not something to talk about. I completely agree with you. Right now, as you look to the future and the economy and globally and in the U.S., what are you seeing, and do you have a point of view here in the U.S. as to what the Fed should do? I mean, I think everybody thought that they were going to go down. Now we're not sure if they're going to go down, or hold, or go up. What's your take on? First, before we talk about the interest rates. What's your take on the economies around the world right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I find, I get up every morning, I have a little gym in my apartment, and I get on the elliptical and I'm pumping away, and I got CNBC on the screen, and they've got all these people that are on CNBC, and they're all talking about how sure they are about this or that. They're this sure about the economy, they're this sure about interest rates. This is going to happen, that's going to happen. Let's start with the fact, I don't know. I'm not sure. And these are very, very complicated things to predict. But here are a few things that I'd say that speak to my personal view of kind of where we are economically. And this has generally been my view for the last 6 to 9 months. The economy has done incredibly well, and it continues to be very resilient. And the economy has been more, here in the United States, has been more resilient to the monetary policy tightening that we've experienced over the last year, which, by the way, has been a very, very, very significant tightening of monetary conditions from very, very easy conditions for an extended period of time. But it's been resilient for, first, a primary reason, which is the level of government spending has been extraordinary, and it continues at an extraordinary pace. And that is dampening this tightening impact that we would normally see. I think if a year ago you and I were sitting here and we said we're going to tighten interest rates, we're going to tighten the policy rate by 500 basis points, it would be hard to imagine that the economy wouldn't have slowed down more at this point in time. But government spending is having an enormous impact on that. There's a secondary function that's now having a big impact on that, which is this acceleration in technological change from CPUs to GPUs and the growth of these large language models and the amount of capital that's going into the infrastructure to support that is a huge economic boom. Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Amazon will spend $200 billion out of free cash flow this year. There are a few countries in the world that can spend $200 billion. That's going to have a support on economic activity as this infrastructure continues to build. That is cushioning, the economy. In the meantime, if you've been watching earnings and talking to CEOs, and this started in the fall, I first started to see this and sense this in September. If you're talking to CEOs that are running businesses that really deal with what I'll call the middle of the American economy, those businesses have been started to see changing consumer behaviors in the fall, but particularly in the last 3 months, they're seeing a real acceleration. So go look at McDonald's earnings. look what I saw. Chris Kopinski is going to speak here in the fall. His earnings, his pricing change. He's bringing prices down to get people back into stores.
Which the franchisees are now bitching about.
Yeah,
the $5.
Yep, $5.
whatever.
Yeah,
I don't go to McDonald's, but it's $5.
$5. But look at a business like AutoZone, et cetera. You can see that people are changing their behavior. I sat next to the CEO of a major supermarket chain last week, and I just said to him, how are you feeling? He said, it's been a struggle. He said I'm not Whole Foods, okay? 3 years ago, my shopper bought 20 items and it cost $100 in his basket. And he said today, those same 20 items cost $125. Okay, he's not buying 20 items, he's buying 16 or 17. My shopper doesn't have the extra $20 to $25. And so inflation is not just nominal, it's cumulative. And so everything is more expensive. You're starting to see, the consumer and the average American, feel this more. They're slowing down, they're changing their spending habits. And, I think we're getting into a slightly different paradigm where you have the economy, if you're looking at GDP numbers and you're an economist, clicking along quite well, but the experience that people feel, day to day, because of the inflationary trend we've had, is still quite palpable. I also personally think the world's set up for inflation to be a little stickier, and I've been saying that for quite some time. And so early in the year, when there was a perspective on 7 cuts, I didn't quite see it. And at the moment, I'm still at 0 cuts. Could there be a cut or two? Sure, there could be a cut or two, but I still don't see the data that's compelling to see that we're going to cut rates here. And I think the world's moved more in that direction than not. So I think we've got, especially in election year, a very, very tricky setup where the economy is kind of doing fine, but most people aren't feeling it the same way. And it's interesting. People talk about core inflation, but for the average American, gas prices, food prices, housing prices, they're up. And so, I think we're at a slightly more fragile place, potentially, than this narrative that we're going to have a very soft landing. Now, we might have a very soft landing. We're set up where the possibility of a soft landing is still significant in the distribution of outcomes. But I think the distribution that we have some sort of a slowdown that's real and palpable because consumer behavior continues to change as we go, into next year, also seems bigger than it felt 6 months ago.
So I'm about to turn to the audience for questions, but any commentary outside the United States in terms of what you're seeing economically?
Yeah, just very simply, take a quick tour around the world. I'd say, Europe has been more sluggish and has some significant structural issues that are making it more sluggish. Clearly, I think you will see more rate cuts there as they wrestle with the fact that they have more sluggishness and they have bigger structural and demographic issues given the way the world's set up. And also, if you listen to, say, the narrative out of Macron and France, et cetera, about what's in front of them, that sets up for a slightly tougher economic ride. I was in China in the last 6 weeks, and I just say, the economy there, is struggling for sure. The combination of all this leads me to say complex geopolitical world, headwinds to growth, complex geopolitical world, inflationary, changes, climate transition, AI infrastructure, inflationary. It feels slow and sluggish around the world is the way I'd say. And, I think the geopolitical fragility is something we're going to live with for a period of time. I don't think that's something that's going to go away quickly.
I agree. Questions from the audience for David? Yes, back here. Just wait for a mic.
Thank you very much for these fantastic insights. Tristan Forrester from Climate Partner. I find it intriguing that you said a quarter of the people working at Goldman Sachs are actually engineers. I don't expect that was the case 25 years ago when you started at Goldman Sachs. Looking forward...
I'm sorry, I want to make sure I heard what you said. You said a quarter of the people...
working at Goldman Sachs
are
engineers.
Are engineers, yes.
Yes? And looking forward with, you actually mentioned AI revolution and change of the way work is being done, and you're saying the key to differentiate Goldman Sachs from others are people. How do you see that development playing out next decade?
Sure. First of all, no, 25 years ago, a quarter of the people weren't engineers. But there's obviously been, an enormous digitization of a lot of what we do, over that time period. It's interesting. We've been using artificial intelligence in our business for decades. Only the capacity of the compute and the quality of what you get out of those AI platforms is obviously accelerating, very, very meaningfully. We are obviously very, very focused on large language models and use cases, both to increase productivity in the organization, to increase productivity of our most productive people, and also to create efficiencies in the organization. And I think over the next decade, it will do both. Nobody can predict, if you want to look for an exact number and answer, as to how many jobs will be lost to efficiency and how many additional people will be hired to scale and expansion. But I just highlight the following that I think is an interesting anecdotal thing to think about. One of my first assignments when I finished my training program at the Irving Trust Company in 1984 was to go do a common stock comparison, comparing how a particular bank, regional bank, our client, traded versus a bunch of other regional banks. How did you do that in 1984? You went to the library, you went to the microfiche, because the only place you could find historical stock trading data was in back issues of the Wall Street Journal. You picked the dates that you wanted, you hand recorded that information, you took out graph paper, you plotted your graph, you then went to the Xerox machine, you copied it. That took about 4 hours. You went to the client, okay, and you sat down and you showed the client how their stock had traded over the last 5 years at different intervals compared to their competitors. And they said, "Thank you very much, you're brilliant." Okay, and today, you ask that question, you have an answer in a fraction of a second. Okay, we don't have less people at Goldman Sachs. The people just do things differently. You can take super productive people and you can make them more productive. Obviously this technology is going to create efficiencies in place where you will change jobs meaningfully. But if you think about our business as a business where the more we can get very smart people bringing value to people directly, the more we can do with them. And so it's just not linear in any way. So it's important that we get these things right. It's a journey we've been on for a long time and it only expands. I see it more as an expansion of what we've always done, although the power of the compute capacity increases. But we're using compute capacity to do things that humans did in seconds, and that doesn't mean we have less humans. So it's not as simple as people want to immediately interpolate to a business like ours. Are there things that are going to go away? I mean, I'm sure if you come across a toll bridge or a toll tunnel in Boston, there are no toll takers here anymore. So that's an example of technology, permanently erasing a job. But at the moment, we have pretty full employment in the economy, and so the economy is pretty resilient to that. And how that plots out for us, we'll see. But I will say, if we had more capacity now, we'd have more engineers. We're gated by kind of short-term public company pressure. If we were operating as a private company, we'd probably be investing more in the short term in certain capacities than what we can afford to invest as a public company.
Other questions? Laura?
Here you go.
Sorry.
Thank you. So a couple of years ago, Goldman Sachs built a venture fund. And I'm just curious, a healthcare venture fund, and I'm just curious as to how that is moving along.
So we, I think what you're referring to is that we've had a variety of growth equity platforms. We've never really been in the true venture business, but we've had quite a big platform around growth equity and a real platform in healthcare, and it's done quite well. I'd say one of the things that I get asked often is, people will ask me about what's going on in the world, and I tend, when I talk about what's going on in the world, to talk first about things that concern me, because when you're talking about things from a macro perspective, those are the things that you've got to worry about. And so one of the things we do as a risk manager is we try to spend 98% of our time worrying about the things that would be really bad that have a 2% of possibility of happening. But then I shift and I say, okay, what am I excited about? Okay, we're just talking about one thing, which is compute capacity and the continued impact of compute. But the other thing I talk about constantly, I'm super excited about, is progress in medtech, biotech, healthcare, drugs, disease prevention, life, helping people live longer, healthier lives. And I have a huge amount of bullishness on the progress, we're going to make, on that front and continue to make. Even though at this point in time, it's interesting that life expectancy in the United States has gone in the wrong direction, even with enormous progress on these things, I do think we're tipping in a variety of places. I think we're tipping around cancer drugs. I think there are finally starting to be signs of real progress around brain disease, although long, long road to go. And so I'm just very optimistic that as technology improves, by the way, same stuff with AI, gives you advantages to accelerate all this. I think it's a huge space of opportunity, growth, optimism that's super, super exciting. And so the firm has resources focused in that direction and lots of clients, obviously, that are hugely, hugely focused.
Other questions?
I was recently in China and was impressed, and then the Wall Street Journal just this week talked about how they're basically winning in the electric vehicle industry, despite the fact that it was really started here in the West. And I think that's coming through heavy government, subsidies, and their expressed intent to just win in certain technology. Now, you mentioned healthy government spending in the U.S. here earlier as being a boon to the economy. Do you think that rise in industrial policy is really a response to the Chinese state-led economy? And what is that good for us in the long run?
Well, the question's a multi-layered, very, very complex, complex question. You can't help but noticing if you go to China, the change if you're in Beijing right now of all the electric cars, all the different brands, et ceta. You have to ask, and the technology is really extraordinary, but you have to ask questions about, how are they being manufactured? What is the cost? What is the margin? And what does that all mean economically for the economy? I still think there are lots of questions around the electrification of consumer cars, of cars, because nobody talks at all about the grids that actually power those cars and where all the power comes from, and combine that also with the power that's necessary to drive the demand for GPUs. We are probably headed to multiple increase in power demand, okay, without having really thought through how we're going to generate that power, on an adequate basis. So I think one of the things that has to be wrapped into industrial policy is really thinking strategically about what are you doing, what are you trying to accomplish. It's great to say we'd like everybody to be driving an electric car in 2035, but if the grid is 20% coal and 60% gas, okay, and 20%, other, how do we feel about that? Because you're not going to have the grid capacity to manage that, especially if they then put GPUs on top of it. So industrial policy has to step back and start to say, what are we trying to accomplish and why? There also is a big political narrative on moving manufacturing back to the United States. And there is some manufacturing that probably should come back to the United States because it's strategic, but there's some manufacturing that doesn't necessarily need to come back to the United States because it's not necessarily strategic. And it also needs to be seen through the lens. If it's not strategic, it actually has to economically work. And so I think these are big, complicated issues. I think we've been lacking, an open and transparent debate around some of this, and they're not easy things to resolve. China, at the end of the day, has an economy that's not delivering what I think it needs to deliver for it to sustain, its direction of travel. If we were here 5 years ago, I would have said that it's inevitable that China would be the largest economy in the world sometime in this decade. Now I would tell you I think the chance of China being the largest economy in the world sometime this decade is low, and that the U.S. will do better in that context. So I think these are deeply complex industrial policy issues that require more thought, more debate, and it's got to start with all of us here in the United States having certain clear policy objectives that we can kind of take away some of the political extremes and start to think about what are we trying to accomplish, how are we trying to accomplish it, why does it matter? And that's very hard to do right now in the political environment that we're in.
So as we're coming to the end of our time and coming up on the Memorial Day weekend, maybe we'll finish with a fun question, a different question. Where did your love of music come from and this desire to be a disc jockey?
It's a hobby that unfortunately I don't get to do as much, at the moment. But I've always loved music, and I got interested. I got interested in music when I was a kid. It was always rock and roll. It was always Bruce Springsteen. But over time, I got interested in other forms of music, and I got interested in house music and this kind of music. And I had a friend that started teaching me to do it, and I did it. And nobody really knew I did it or cared that I did it. And then obviously, when I had a bigger job, it became more visible that I was doing it. And so I was doing it occasionally, directing any money that came from it to charity. I was producing some music, and I enjoy it. It's a different way to use the brain. I'm at the moment, I'm not doing it as much as I used to, but I still enjoy it, and I think it's something that I will continue to do, as I finish up my job at Goldman Sachs ultimately, and enjoy.
Well, I applaud you for it. I think
Hopefully
we
more
all,
days like you, one day.
It's not a bad gig that I got going. I applaud you for doing it. It's awesome to work other sides of your brain and distract yourself from the craziness of the 24/7 nature of your job. David Solomon, thank you. You were great to be here and great to be with you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you. Good to be with you.